Hey everyone, in today's video I'm going to talk about the first book that I started to use to learn Vietnamese after switching from Rosetta Stone. So follow me through to find out my thoughts on Teach Yourself Vietnamese and whether or not it's worth your money. So when I first switched over from Rosetta Stone, it's because I felt like I really wasn't progressing at an even rate. You learn a little bit really fast with Rosetta Stone, and then it kind of tails off, and the rest of the learning is really slow, which is okay, except when you reach a plateau and you really have trouble getting past it. So I made the switch to learning from a book after watching some YouTube videos. I went out and bought myself Teach Yourself Vietnamese with the accompanying audio. I think I got it from Amazon. Not that expensive, and started my learning. I found with the book it's a lot easier to progress quicker because you're getting full chunks of dialogue, you're getting all the vocabulary that goes with it, and really seeing how the language functions and works together, rather than with Rosetta Stone you get little chunks here and there, and really basic vocabulary that you can't use for conversation until much later on. Whereas with the Teach Yourself book, colloquial books, all these books are kind of formatted the same, where you get conversational language right away, right from the beginning. So because I was unfamiliar with learning a language, I really took too long going through the book. There's 18 chapters and you should be able to work through it at a pretty reasonable pace, whereas I took too long. I'm aware of that now. I could have progressed much quicker had I just mapped out or planned out how I was going to study and my goals for progression. I know that now, so that's what I do now. But back then, when I first started, I really didn't know, and I was coming from something like Rosetta Stone, where they kind of take you step by step through the progression that they have planned out. So the language learning wasn't really under my control, whereas when you get the book, totally under your control, what you want to study, how you want to study, what works best for you is really one of the best features of having a book in audio. You can dictate your own learning schedule and what you want to do. So let's jump into the book, and I will show you the inside of the book and some of the audio so you can see what Teach Yourself Vietnamese has to offer. So when you open up the book, you get this introduction at the beginning, talking about the language of Vietnamese and a little bit of how the language functions, the script, and then you get into how to use the course. So it talks about the conversations, the expressions, the different grammatical points that you can read up on in each section, little reading passages. Beyond the dialogues, there is a bit of reading that you can do and different activities, some cultural information points that you will get as you're reading and going through the units. And then it does move into a pronunciation guide. Because Vietnamese is a tonal language, it is really good to go over this and at least familiarize yourself with the tones. This book, along with most books that you're going to get for learning Vietnamese, are in the standard dialect, or the Hanoi dialect, the northern dialect. Everything's recorded pretty clearly here, and while I don't spend a lot of time in these pronunciation guides, it is good to, when you first start, to sit down and listen and at least get an understanding for what you need to be paying attention to while you're going through the units. Your ability to hear the tones and recreate the tones and understand the tones is going to get better as you go along and study the dialogues and listen to more and more Vietnamese. But as a way to start so that you can become aware of what it is that you're looking for, these pronunciation guides are decent. Not the best. You're not going to totally grasp the Vietnamese dialect or tones or pronunciation just by listening to this pronunciation guide and going through it. But it does give you a good start so that as you're moving through the units, you're aware of what to look for, what to listen for, and the types of things that you need to be noticing. So it does go into the tones, and it gives you a bunch of distinctions that can be made. So all of this is on the audio. You can listen to all of it. They do go through the alphabet, and they talk about the vowels and diphthongs, consonants, and you get some example words as it goes. So once we get into the actual units themselves, There is quite a bit of English on these recordings. So each unit, they give you a description in English of what it is you're going to be listening to, the situation that you're going to be hearing. And then they have the dialogues here. There's no direct translation. So, for example, in the Assamil book, one side of the page will have the Vietnamese, the other side will have the original language. My Assamil book is French, so one side is Vietnamese, one side is French. But in Teach Yourself, they don't do that. Instead, what they do is they give you a glossary of the terms that you're going to be hearing and reading. This is pretty good. I like this method as well. What I used to do is I would write down each of these units in Vietnamese, and then on the other side of my page in my notebook, I'd write it out in English, and then I'd go back and try and translate from one to the other. So having this glossary here is pretty helpful. After that, you get some activities. I never really did the activities. I go through and have a look at them, more for reading practice and to see some of these new glossary words in another context or in another sentence structure, just as a way to get more exposure to those words. Then you get some grammatical points and talking about the things that you're learning in the unit, how these words differ from English and Vietnamese and so on. Again, you get some more examples here for the grammatical points. Again, lots of English. You can see that, lots of English, which, when you're first starting out is not such a bad thing, but eventually, at this point, I prefer to use a book that has more Vietnamese on the pages and less English on the pages. And so you get some questions here. Some of the units have a second conversation following on, whatever they covered in the first conversation. So you are getting some of those words a second or third time. And then again, some more exercises. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to play you one of the units here. I'll play the audio for it so you can hear what it sounds like. And let me just go ahead and play this.
Unit 8. Do you still work in the hotel? Peter is late. Hua and Nam are getting nervous waiting for him.
Tại sao anh ta chưa đến? Anh ta hẹn đến lúc 8 giờ phải không?
Phải, chúng ta chờ mấy phút nữa. Anh ta chắc chắn sẽ đến. À, anh Peter đây. Tôi sợ là anh không đến.
Xin lỗi, tôi đến muộn. Tôi đã ngủ quên. Lúc 2 giờ sáng tôi mới đi ngủ.
Tại sao muộn thế?
Đêm qua tôi phải viết cho...
Okay, so there you go. There's just an example of one of the units. So, as you can tell at the beginning, you do get the English bit there, setting up the unit, what they're going to be talking about, and then it gets right into the Vietnamese. The recordings for these books are quite clear. The pronunciation and the delivery of the lines is very clear. It's not quite natural. It is a bit rehearsed and slower than normal speech might be if you're actually talking with a Vietnamese person. Tends to go quite a bit faster than what they use in these books. And they do have that bit of background noise to try and bring the scene alive, or attempt to give you the feeling that you're in a natural situation. I don't think those things work. I find them more distracting than anything else. But it is what it is. I find that's the case with a lot of these, beginner texts, or these are really common texts. These are not university level textbooks or language learning textbooks per se. These are for the average user. So a lot of them do have this background noise to try and immerse you in the environment, but I don't find that it works for me personally. But the dialogues are clear. You can hear everything they said. If you needed to slow it down, you could slow it down and listen to it a bit slower using Audacity or something like that. But the speed that they're at is really not too bad once you get used to the sound of Vietnamese. Pretty easy to follow along, and again, you have the glossary here in case you didn't get any of those words. So whenever you're using one of these beginner textbooks, a lot of them will say, they'll advertise B2 level. That seems to be the magic number that they pick. Teach Yourself, Assamil, they all will say something like they'll get you to the intermediate level, everything you need to get to the intermediate level, or everything you need to reach the B2 level. I find that's not true. That's not the case. At best, the beginnings of a B1 level, you'll be able to build on it, but they are good for an introduction to the language and to really start working on it if you have no real background in the language, or with learning languages in general. These are a pretty good place to start. You can see here in the opening pages, you'll get things like pleasantries, I'm pleased to meet you, occupation related words, general conversation stuff, days of the week, words related to time and date, talking about shopping and eating and things like that. So all the basic words that you're going to need. If you're going on a trip to Vietnam, a lot of the words that you're going to get here are the basic words that you'll need for dealing with somebody in a hotel or ordering food, things like that. So it will get you going. You will learn quite a bit and get a foothold in the language, and then from a book like this you can move on to something more robust, something that will actually get you to a B2 level. But as a place to start, these books are not too bad. You will get the basic grammatical structures, the basic concepts, an understanding of the sound of Vietnamese and the types of things that you should be listening for. There's a total of 18 units in this book, I believe, and by the time you're done, moving to a more robust book is quite a bit easier. So all in all, not a bad book. If you're looking for a place to start, these are pretty good. You can see here by the 18th, this is a pretty long dialogue here. It's at least a few minutes of conversation, and it gets pretty complicated, talking about history and geography and culture and stuff like that of Vietnam. So by the time you get to this 18th chapter, you should have a basic understanding and be able to follow along and, like I said, move into a more complicated, robust book that will get you to that B2 level. Alright, so there you go. That's my review of Teach Yourself Vietnamese, what I thought of the book. Like I said, gets you to a low intermediate level. Any of these mass market books I really wouldn't use on its own. You need to use it with something else, whether you're doing it with a tutor, or you're using the FLR system, or you're using Glossica's mass sentence method or something like that to get the additional input coming in and really playing with the language. But these books are a good start to get the foundations and really start building off of. So have you tried out Teach Yourself Vietnamese, or are you looking to buy it? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks.